Hello and welcome back to my channel, friends. Always so happy to see you here. Today I'm going to be talking about emergency funds. I've actually had this video planned for quite some time to record this week, and in light of current events, I'm just happy to get this information out to try to help you and as many people as possible. But before we get into the video, I just want to take a second to introduce myself to those of you new here. My name is Holly. I love talking all things personal finance as well as how to live a better, more eco-intentional, and just happier lifestyle on less by living a more intentional life, which helps you across all facets of it. So if this sounds like something that might be interesting to you, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and let's get right to it. You may have noticed I'm in a different location today. I have officially been kicked out of my office. Wah, wah, wah. My husband, who works part-time in this city, is now part-time working from home. His New York City office, they are all now working remotely, and then he also works from New Jersey, and so he's working there part-time. So when he's home, he now heads my office. But if you follow me on Instagram, you're probably very familiar with this lovely couch. I do a lot of my stories from here, so this is probably familiar to you. But anyway, I thought we'd sit down and chat. I have some coffee, and I just want to talk about emergency funds, what they are, what they're not, where to keep them. But then I also want to talk specifically about a $1,000 starter emergency fund, where the idea came from, what my husband and I did on our debt-free journey, and then if a $1,000 starter emergency fund is right for you and your family. So first things first, what is an emergency fund? It's also known as a rainy day fund, and this is basically a set amount of money that you have put aside that you can access if there is an actual emergency in your life. Emergencies could be a car repair, not something that is cosmetic, but something that would prevent you from being able to drive your car safely or at all. Or something like your fridge broke down and you need a repair, or maybe you have an emergency room repair. Just anything like that that is a true emergency and that you cannot reasonably move on with your life without this money. When an emergency fund is not, is extra money you have put aside in case a pair of shoes goes on sale, or if maybe there's a couch you really want for your house, or I'd say even if your dishwasher broke down, because you can hand wash dishes. And as a dishwasher lover, it's a sacrifice. I totally understand it, but it's not a true emergency. So it's very key to know the difference between a true emergency and maybe just a strong want when it comes to your emergency fund. Now you may wonder, where do you keep your emergency fund? I personally think it's a good idea to have it in a separate bank account than your usual account where you might pay your bills or something like that, because you just want to make sure you're not spending it. But it's very important that it is easily accessible. You do not want to put it in something like a CD, or especially the stock market, anything where it's going to be hard, time consuming, or there will be financial penalties if you remove that money. I would suggest a high yield savings account, maybe something like an online only account, something like that. But I do recommend keeping it in a separate account that is relatively easily accessible and that you will not have any fees for withdrawing that money. Now, as I said, I do want to focus on the idea of a $1,000 starter emergency fund. And if you're wondering where that idea came from, it's actually one of Dave Ramsey's baby steps. It's baby step 1. I'm gonna go ahead and link above the previous video I did explaining Dave Ramsey's 7 baby steps. So if you are unfamiliar with his 7 baby steps, you can check out that video, and I go into more depth about the 7 baby steps and exactly what they are, the order they're in, and why they're in that order. In baby step 1, before tackling your debt, Dave recommends saving $1,000 in a starter emergency fund. And I fully realize that for some people, this may seem like a great amount, and a very hard number to get to. While other people, they might think this is nowhere near enough, they might already have that money, and they might think they need more. So if you are following Dave Ramsey's baby steps, you're probably trying to get out of debt. So a lot of people are very, very anxious to start paying off that debt and wonder, well, why do I need an emergency fund first? Shouldn't I concentrate on paying off my debt first? The purpose of the starter emergency fund is so that when you're paying off your debt, if an emergency does arrive and you have money in the bank and you don't go back into debt or you don't accumulate more debt, because once you get rid of your debt, you never want to have it again. So the starter emergency fund is meant to be there as a safety net in case an emergency comes up, and even better, and hopefully it'll keep Murphy away altogether. This $1,000 starter emergency fund, you are going to have a lot of people who don't think that's enough, and that makes them very uncomfortable. But Dave wants you to be uncomfortable. That's the entire point. Because when you only have $1,000 in your emergency fund, it makes you uncomfortable. It kind of lights a fire under your katukis and makes you work harder on baby step 2, which is paying off all that debt. And then really quickly, baby step 3 is to build a larger emergency fund. But the point is to make you uncomfortable so that when you're paying off debt in baby step 2, that you want to pay it off as soon as possible, so then you can start beefing up that emergency fund so it's greater than $1,000. Recently, my husband and I got out of 6 figures worth of debt. Just this past January, we paid off over $135,000. About $100,000 of that was paid in under 4 years, and that was when we first started getting attentional. So between 3 and 4 years, we were on baby step 2, kind of officially. So during that time, my husband and I decided to have more than a $1,000 emergency fund. It was a personal choice we had to make. And I fully believe that personal finance is personal. We had to sit down and talk about it. And I have to say, my husband and I have very different opinions and comfort levels when it comes to money. My husband is very used to having a high emergency fund. Ever since I met him, he's been very good with money. He is a natural saver, unlike me. And so he's used to that higher emergency fund. Now me, I went through most of my 20s, not only without any sort of emergency fund, but maxing out my credit cards, overdrawing on so many of my bank accounts on a pretty regular basis. So for me, I had, I guess, a lower risk tolerance, and I was okay with a smaller emergency fund. But when you're in a marriage, you have to compromise and you have to decide what's best for the both of you and where you guys are both going to be comfortable with. Now, I fully understand, again, like Dave says, the point is to be uncomfortable, but in mine and my husband's eyes, we were going to be on this debt-free journey for longer than average, and we did not want only a $1,000 starter emergency fund for that long of a time. Throughout our journey, we've had anywhere between a 3-month to probably about a 9-month emergency fund at any given time. Now, I will say throughout our journey, I think my risk tolerance has probably stayed the same, but I think my husband's has changed throughout the course of our debt-free journey, which at some points we were able to take chunks of our emergency fund and apply it to our debt. So we did have some months where we put a lot of money towards our debt because we took it from this bigger than usual emergency fund. But I will say I was personally happy that we had this larger emergency fund because there was a few things that came up along the way on our debt-free journey. 2 things that I can immediately think of. One was we had an emergency leak in our house and we ended up having to buy a new water tank. Those are not cheap, and that definitely cost over $1,000. And then just as soon as last year in 2019, we had a tax bill of about $4,500. Now, we usually get money back with our taxes every year, but we had a one-off situation and we knew that wouldn't be the case, but we also did not expect to pay that much. So I was really happy that we had that $4,500 in our bank account that we could just write a check to the IRS, not have to worry about it and be done with it. It did eat into our new to us car fund, but we were still okay because of that padding in our emergency fund. Now you're probably wondering, is a $1,000 starter emergency fund enough for you and your family and your circumstances? Here are a few of my questions that I think you should ask yourself when deciding if a $1,000 starter emergency fund is enough for you. One, how long is your journey, / how much are you paying off? If your journey is going to be relatively short, then maybe a $1,000 starter emergency fund would work for you and your family. But if your journey, like ours, is maybe going to be years and years long, or your team tiny shovel, and at this point it looks like it's going to take multiple years to pay off your debt, then you might want to consider having a larger starter emergency fund, just because it's more likely that something's going to happen in the course of 2 years than in the course of 6 months. It's just math. Second, how steady are your jobs? Do you have a job that you work on commission? Do you have a seasonal job? Do you have a job that's just volatile for any other reason? In this scenario, then you might want to consider having a higher emergency fund. But on the other hand, if you have something like a corporate job or just a very steady job that you're really not worried about, and there's really little to no risk about you just all of a sudden losing your job, then a $1,000 starter emergency fund may be enough for you and your family. Number 3, how many people are in your family? If it's just you, then $1,000 starter emergency fund may be perfectly fine. But do you have a family of 6? That just increases your chances that an emergency may come up with someone, or in an emergency situation, you might need more money. And finally, number 4, what is your cost of living, or how much are your necessary bills on a monthly basis? Maybe you live in a super low cost of living area where your bills are relatively low, and $1,000 could even cover a month worth of expenses. Then a $1,000 starter emergency fund might be totally fine for you. On the other hand, you may live in a very high cost of living area where $1,000 isn't even going to cover a third of your monthly expenses, and you just really maybe want 1 month worth of expenses saved up. So in that case, I would probably bump up the emergency fund a little bit. So these are some of the many reasons why I think personal finance should be personal, and that I don't think $1,000 is right for everyone, because I think there's just a lot of different dynamics in each family and situation where you just need to make your own call and do what you think is right for you and your family. In light of everything that's happening in the world right now with this pandemic, I did want to take a second to express how important emergency funds are. There are so many people right now whose livelihoods could take a big hit with what's already starting to happen in some parts of the world, like where I am right outside of New York City, or what may happen with the rest of the country and world. There are so many people that work hourly or work on commission or work in the service industry, and they may not have those jobs either temporarily, or possibly they may be losing their jobs because there are some businesses already talking about having to close down. Now, I realize this is a very unprecedented occurrence happening right now, but it is an emergency, and this is what an emergency fund is for. Do you have enough? If, say, for instance, you have to be in your home for 2 weeks, do you have enough to stock up on groceries today for 2 weeks? You might not. If you are living paycheck to paycheck, you might not have that money readily available. This is the reality for many, many Americans. What happens if you lose your job temporarily, or if you're a waitress and there's no customers coming in and you rely on those tips? If you don't have an emergency fund, then you and your family could be in a very, very hard situation right now. Having an emergency fund is just, to me, an essential part of life. Stuff always happens. That's part of life. And it's just better to be prepared for it. It's like having insurance. I know we're all trying to do our best and take care of our families the best way we know how. And having an emergency fund is a great first step to that. And I also previously did a video about how to create that $1,000 starter emergency fund fast. I'm gonna go ahead and link it here so you can check it out. As always, thank you so much for being here. I really do truly appreciate it. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and get out there and live a more intentional life. Thanks, friends, and I'll see you in the next one.